Hello. The history of Games Workshop was not just one driven by unbridled creative brilliance, it was also born out of canny business decision making and embracing new technologies. The machines, materials, and processes involved in the creation of cards, books, and miniatures would help to fuel the growth of Games Workshop for decades. My guest today, John Thornthwaite, was at the leading edge of plastics technology in the 80s, having worked at Matchbox, and then, after a chance encounter with Bryan Ansell, leading Games Workshop's adoption of plastics for the creation of their miniatures. He would also become CEO of a company that Games Workshop used to produce those plastic miniatures. From viability tests with slotta bases to the first Games Workshop plastics for fighting fantasy, and on to the plastic sprues from RTB01 and the Land Raider to many other classics. We talk about the brilliance and business of making plastic miniatures. There were a couple of technical hiccups during our recording, so I have done my best to edit around them and smooth them out. I apologise for any issues that you encounter in the audio or the visuals. I hope that they're not too distracting because John's stories are absolutely fascinating. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with Games Workshop's former head of plastics, John Thornthwaite. John, thank you so much for being here. It's great to have you. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about your career before Games Workshop, or sort of what got you to the point where you ended up going to work with Games Workshop on their plastics.
Well, I hadn't really heard about Games Workshop as such. I'd done a bit of wargaming myself, but it had been Napoleonics and 300 scale Second World War desert battles.
Right.
And I wasn't really into fantasy or that. But what I'd been into, and which most of my career, was plastic injection molding. Now, I'd served 5-year apprenticeship with the English Electric up in Liverpool and worked my way. They did proper apprenticeships in them days where you spent 3 months in every department of the factory. You learned to use every machine in the factory, even, inspection and everything else. So at the end of 5 years, you knew everything you needed to know about the factory. I finished up in the tool room making injection molding tools and press tools. I'd always wanted to go into the drawing office. I'd done a short stretch during one of the 3 months, but that had been in the training school. So I asked if I could go into the drawing office, and very kindly, they put me in the drawing office. I found that a bit boring. When you're at exams and things like that, you 3 hours to design the Titanic, and away you go. So when I go in the drawing office, the guy comes up to me and says, the boss says, design this tool and make this press thing. I said, yeah, sure. I looked at the job and I said, I'll have it for tomorrow. He says, no. There's a 3-week budget on this. Bring me the drawings in 3 weeks. And I said, well, what do we do for the rest of the time? He said, well, amuse yourself. God, what a job. And yeah, sure. After a few weeks, I thought, blow it. This is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be, as it were, creative. So I asked to go out of there. And I'd noticed that when you're on the shop floor, the only way you got promotion was waiting for the guy ahead of you to fall down.
Mm.
In a factory with 15,000 people in, there's a lot of waiting time. But the bosses, I'd noticed that certain young men in suits were able to pop into the boss's offices anytime they liked. And I found out these were the work study engineers. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So I noticed there was a vacancy for some, and I applied, got the job, again, still within English Electric, and went off, done 2 or 3 courses on different aspects. And then I was put into the work study office. And they seemed to think I had a talent for dealing with people. So they put me in the fuse gear section. If you can imagine 400 women in one area where even the male fork truck drivers were scared to go into.
Right.
My job was to go and stand in the middle of these women and do time and motion studies on their work. And it was quite an education for a young lad like me then. And some of the stories and some of the things were a bit more. But basically, I was into work study, and I really enjoyed it. Then I was married. I just got married. I'd moved over the water from Liverpool. I was living in Wallasey, Birkenhead then, and a local company in Birkenhead, Beric Toys, advertised for a work study engineer. And I thought, that sounds better, because I was getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning, bus down to Woodside, ferry over the Mersey, bus out to English Electric, and start work at 8 o'clock. And I thought, a factory on my doorstep. So I joined Beric Toys. There were 3 of us work study engineers in there, and we've been given the brief to reorganize the whole factory and bring it up to date. And we, Bob Lowe, the top guy, he was the one who liaised with management. And myself and Tom Charnock, we were the guys who went out and done the timing on the floor and the reorganizing. And we'd done the factory completely, and it looked really good, but it wasn't given the results that the management were expecting. And so we pointed out that it was basically down to the fact that you still had the same managers running the new departments.
Right.
There were 2 managers, each had 3 departments. And using a bit of a psychology, we said, we'll make your life easier. You can run 2 departments each, and the 2 vacant departments we'll give to John to run. So I then went in and immediately turned those departments round, much to the annoyance of the other 2 guys who suddenly found themselves, he's showing us up, this young whippersnapper, this whiz kid, and it eventually we got the factory perfect. At that point in time, Beric was part of what was the Beric Timpo group, and we did have a moulding shop which used to mould tea sets and everything, and quite technical stuff. And I was always in there, what was going on. We also had Timpo, who moulded the little soldiers, the multicolored soldiers. They had a very interesting moulding process, and I'd studied that as well, where, if you can imagine, you mould a little body, Roman soldier, then you mould his armour on him, then you mould his belt, and you just keep adding different colours. And it was quite good, fairly labour intense, but quite good. Maybe you can still buy these figures on eBay now. But again, I was familiarising myself more and more with injection moulding. And then the firm promoted me and sent me down to Peterborough, which is where I reside now, as works manager for another toy company, Peter Pan Playthings. And I went in there, and again, it was one of these brand new factory, moved up from London, wanted setting up, and I set it up, got it running and everything. And Tom Charnock, the other guy, he'd come down. He was the works director and I was the works manager. And Tom was the same age as me, he might have been a few months older, but I could see no future. I couldn't move on, move up the ladder or anything. And Matchbox moved to Peterborough. They had a factory built in Peterborough with the sole intention of producing Matchbox kits, the aircraft, tank, ships. And as I'd always built aircraft kits from I was 10, it appealed to me going there as I went there as production control director, production control manager, which put me sort of second in command in the factory. It was the works manager, and then everything underneath I took. So I went in there, and you can imagine, it was like a kid in a sweet shop. There it was, 70 injection molding machines producing little plastic kits, which I loved building. So dinner breaks used to be, I'd go out onto the shop floor, pick a kit up, come into the office, and while I had my sandwiches, build it. Quality control, you understand. But yes, I worked at Matchbox till 1983, and I loved every minute of it. And then the place went into receivership. They made the decision, the receivers moved, they made the decision to shut down Peterborough because it was the only rented site they had. They owned all the other 12 factories down London and Southend and Rochford. So my last jobs was close down the factory, move the operation to Rochford, Kent, in Essex, and then they offered me a job down there, but for personal circumstances, I could sell my 4-bedroomed house here in Deeping and get a 2 up, 2 down in the dubious district of Southend, drag the wife and the kids away from school, and I decided to opt for the redundancy. So I was made redundant. And hung about a bit, and then I went up to Manchester where I got a proper job as night shift manager running a electrical component factory. That was a 6 months trial period, and at the end of the 6 months they wanted me to stay on and move me on to days because I'd got a bit of a reputation as someone who could do things, achieve results. And they sacked one of the day managers and were going to move me on. And then I turned around and gave them my notice. I'd found a job down in Peterborough, so in another toy company. And they were most upset. They made me work 2 months. They wanted me to work 3 months' notice. But I said, I'll give you a month's notice. And they said, no, we want 3 months. So we compromised on 2 months. So I worked the 2 months and then returned back to Peterborough. But the firm down in Peterborough, when I got inside, started looking at all the paperwork and everything what was involved, I'd made a bad move. And the place went into receivership again. I shut it down. Now, at that time, I'd got tied in with a friend, John Pomfret, from Triple K, not Triple K, shooting ahead of myself, from Matchbox. And he was setting up a little moulding company in Peterborough. And while I was working in Manchester, I used to work 5 days a week and then come down to Peterborough for the weekend. At the weekends, I'd go and help John. no pay or anything. Just John was fantastic with machinery, tooling. He was Matchbox's expert on molds and injection molding. I looked after paperwork and run machines and help them. And the way he rewarded me was when I'd been made redundant from Matchbox. Well, the redundancy payments I'd got, the wife had said to me, well, you've earned it. You do what you like with it. So using all my old contacts in Matchbox, pattern makers, tool makers, and everyone else, a lot had been made redundant and set up on their own. So I linked up with them and got them. I'd always thought when I was in Matchbox about the way they made kits. You could do it better by doing it this way, that way, blah, blah, blah. Suggestion. But people don't always listen. But I suddenly had this money and I thought, oh, I'll make myself a kit. So I went off and I set up a little business, JB Models, making 1/76 scale plastic vehicles. The first one being a soft top Land Rover. And as a favour, John Pomfret would mould them on one of his injection moulding machines. And that was the payback. But John eventually moved to Wisbech with the moulding company. I helped them move and was still helping them out when Ferris went into receivership. So there it was, no job, helping John, and had just released this JB model kit of a little Land Rover. And this is where Games Workshop gets involved. I went to a model show somewhere way up north, I think it was Bolton, in sort of November. Weather was terrible, loud. And it was a model show. I went up and had a little table, and on my table I had kits of my Land Rover, which I was selling. On the next table was Bryan Ansell selling Citadel miniatures. Business wasn't very good for either of us, so we two of us sat there chatting to each other. And Bryan seemed to be pumping me about injection moulding. He was a bit concerned at the time because the government were talking about getting rid of lead out of toys.
Right.
Yeah, I think the problem was applying to all the figure casting companies, and if you eat enough figures, you'll get lead poisoning and die. But how many figures you have to eat, the government didn't know. But so Bryan was thinking in other ways, go to plastic. So he seemed to be pumping me, and then the show finished, and the two of us packed up and went off.
Because around that time, I was just curious, what would the economics have been like for plastics at that time? Would it have been more expensive to make plastic models than to make the metal? No. So there would be a cost saving as well, potentially, and a profit.
Well, that comes along later. If you imagine, going back, when I first produced my JB kits, I used to sell them at £1 in a box. They actually cost me about 8p to mould.
Wow.
Yeah. But the thing about plastic is recovery on the tooling cost. And that's what put a lot of people off when, when I was chatting to Bryan about it, his little rubber disc making 20 figures ooh, 10 quid.
Hmm.
A plastic injection molding tool to make 10 figures, you're talking 7 or 8,000.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a
So
huge
you have to
investment.
you have to mold an awful lot of figures and sell them to recover your tooling. And that's what stopped everybody doing it. But I'd explained all this to Bryan, and then I think it was the February 85. I had this phone call. It was from Bryan. He said, I'd like to come over and have a meal with me. So I said, yeah, sure. So I came over. And we had this meal. And he said, he'd been thinking about what I'd said and everything. And he was thinking that possibly plastics might be a way for Games Workshop to go. He says, they still have this threat of banning lead in toys, and they were all working on different combinations of other metals to carry on the die cast, casting. But he was thinking different line. And he said, I'm thinking of employing a plastics manager for Games Workshop. It was Citadel Miniatures. It was still Citadel at that time. He hadn't tied up with Ian and Steve. So I said, yeah, I'd be interested, because John Pomfret and I, with Triple K Moulding, which is what we called our moulding company, was John owned 80%, I owned 20%. But we were struggling to get going. So neither of us were drawing salaries, so literally had no income. And the offer of a job for working with Bryan appealed. I thought, yeah, okay. I said to him, I always remember this. I said to him, well, what do you want me to do? He says, well, we want to go into plastics. I says, okay, have you got any plastic molds? He says, no. I says, well, I've got plastic machines, I can run them, and you haven't got no molds. I says, what have you got? And he says, I've got ideas. And we need someone to turn those ideas into reality. And I said, right, okay, I can do that. He said, righto. So we sort of sorted salary and things out, and I went off, and sure enough, I think it was the beginning of April, 1st of April, I got a letter saying, you're now Citadel Miniatures Plastics Manager. I thought, right, pop over and see us. So I came over, and they were at Newark at the time. So he showed me the setup at Newark. I think there was about 25 people employed, and Alan Merritt was in the casting, and he showed me what to do. And I went off and I met Rick Priestley and I think Hal in the little cottage they had a bit further down the road. But Bryan, when I looked at the zinc die cast, the spinning and everything, the casting, Bryan said to me sort of, don't get interested in that. I don't want you going that. I want you to differently. So yeah. So I spent a bit of time there, a couple of days, and then he said, you can go off and work at Triple K if you like. So I went back to Triple K and I'm working with John. And Bryan said, we'll contact you when we need you. So I thought, that's okay. Yeah. So it got to the end of the month and there'd been no contacts. But my paycheck turned up. Oh, this is good, yeah, I carried on. A day or two later, though, I got a phone call from Bryan. Come over, we've got an idea. We'd like it to discuss with you. So I went over, and he produced this little slotta base, mock-up of a slotta base. And he said, could you make something like that? And how much would it cost? And blah, blah, blah. I said, yeah. I said, tooling initially, I said, we can do it. I've got some old tools back at the factory. We'll cut one of them up and we'll make you a slotter-based tool. So I went away and I made a 20mm square slotter-based tool. It was a little tool, very small. And one little section of it, I put a slotter base in, put it in the machine, used a load of slotter bases. They came back. They were made up great. And they started modifying their metal figures. Now, I was molding these little figures, these slotter bases, and I think the cost, because it was a single impression tool, your costings is based on the weight of plastic and how fast the machine runs and how much it costs to run the machine. So if you make a one impression tool and your plastic costs 10p, costs a penny, and it costs 2p to run the machine, it's going to cost you 3p. There's not much difference in running a bigger machine or a bigger tool. So if you make a 10 impression tool, plastic's still only going to cost you a penny, but the machine cost is going to be a third. You've cut that cost down. So the more impressions you make, the better. So this single impression thing was knocking the slotter bases off one at a time, and they were about a penny each. They chopped the lump of lead off the bottom of a figure and weighed it, and I think it was costing something like 12p.
Right.
So we reckoned by modifying a slotter base, you would then got a visitor. you'd get something like a 10p saving on each figure.
Right.
Which, when you're producing several thousand figures a week,
yeah.
Brian was, every figure spin of a tool was 10 figures, and you save 10p on every one of them.
Sure.
You're becoming very profitable.
Yeah.
So Brian said, "Oh yeah, can we do better?" I said, "Yeah, you can make a bigger tool, more impressions." So we did. I made a 4 impression one, which gave us quarter the cost. And the snag then became, we weren't making enough base. The machine couldn't turn them out fast enough to meet up with the demand. So we went to a 16 impression, then a 32 impression. And these machines are running all the time, producing thousands and thousands of these slotter bases. Brian was also then kicking ideas about a round slotter base. Yeah, sure. So we go off, and on this little tool I then made a round slotter base. We started producing them. Oh yeah, they're great. Then we went to a big impression tool of that. And eventually, I think on that we had a horse base, around a 20mm square, a 25mm square, and this little test tool was happily producing these, and that had actually cost Brian nothing.
Right.
But it had proved his theory, and it was going, yeah, now we go into the big stuff and we start producing the lots. So yeah, I think he could see the economics of, and sometime, justifying tooling cost and that. I'd put it in and he'd look at it, and the tooling cost would frighten him.
Sure.
But then Brian could say, I can see the benefits, yeah. And it was good. And basically I was just left to, I'd turn up at the studio, or wherever they were, be given an idea, go away, do it. Bryan was looking at sort of figures as well, and it explained the sort of process of the figures, how you do figures and that. 3-up master, resin casting, pantograph it into the steel, and then build the tool around the insert, as it were.
Yeah, because the tool itself, just to clarify, that's like literally the metal mold equivalent, is it?
That's the metal mold, yes. Metal
and that's
mold,
what
yeah.
you're pumping the plastic into. So when
Yes.
that tool cost is what is going to be the actual miniature or the solder paper.
Yes, that's the killer.
Yeah.
That's what puts a lot of people off,
Yeah.
But Bryan can see it. But we at Triple K we had a small tool room, and I could make the tools myself. I'd been a tool maker. We had pantographs, which we had some. Most of our tool makers were ex-Matchbox people who had been made redundant, and we relocated them and moved them in, and we rebuilt because they had the expertise. And we started looking at the figure aspect. One which was not a success was Fighting Fantasy. These were 28 mil, 54 mil figures and bigger ones. They were in polythene, no styrene. Because we had a problem. They were so big and bulky that we had a job. They were sinking. When you molded it, it would collapse in on itself. And we had to overcome that problem, which we did through using low aging. But yeah, but they weren't a great success. They were more, I would say, children's thing rather than the war game fraternity. We did do a game with them, which was literally a box in expanded polystyrene, and inside the floor was cut up was, as it were, etched in 1-inch squares. And you got several walls which you could divide this box up into by putting, and in the middle of the box was a stairway. And it was so designed that you could come in, work your way through the rooms you'd formed with these, go up the stairs, and then literally come out under the staircase into the floor again. Right. So you could build these one on top of the other and work your way up and down. Again, that was another idea that we tried. All these things we tried, we sold, and they went. We got rid of all the stock, but they weren't what I would say was our core theme. But it was the Warhammer fantasy thing. It was a sort of childish spin-off that didn't quite work. The other thing we did was expanded polystyrene castle. Again, that was clipped together, wall sections, everything, build as big as you liked. Snag was, they didn't travel very well. The castellations get knocked off in transit and you have to throw the thing away. And there was another idea that Bryan approached me with, I implemented. We did do I think I've got one. I don't know if you can see it. A bit awkward at working this camera.
Oh, just about, yeah. Is that one of the dwarves, psychosyrene dwarves, is
one
it?
Of the dwarves, yeah.
Yeah.
We decided to have a go at that. And we got one of the designers, I can't remember which one, to make all the bits. And then I took it away and we made them 3 up, 3 times full the size you wanted. And then I took them away, got them all cast up. We cut the little tool and we molded them. And the idea was we put one on the front of White Dwarf on one issue.
Right.
It was quite successful. I think the shops had a problem with kids nicking them off the front of the magazine. But then that was but it went. But gradually, we'd moved from Newark to Chewton Street, and I used to go into Chewton Street, basically delivering stock and checking on the stock levels and making sure nothing was going wrong. Then we moved to high pavements, and we had 2 locations, I think, in the centre of Nottingham. I can't remember which, but I used to go in, and at that point, they brought the designers in-house. They used to work outside, and I used to go off and sometimes go to their homes and meet up with them, and when they were working on a project. But then we all came in-house, and I'd go into the studio, chat with them. I used to love that. They were fantastic characters. And I'd work my way around and say, what are you working on today? Or working plastic up. And they'd show me and I'd say, oh yeah. And I'd be looking at it from a technical aspect, like, Christ, there's no way we're going to mold that. You need to move his arm this way, that way. And politely explaining to them why. And I say they were good, and they learned. I always admit that if I had mentioned something to them, they took note of it, and they built it in. They were good. And I'd work my way around the team, and I'd also be doing other things. I'd talk to 1 or 2 of the other people. Didn't get much involved with the printing process and that, or those people, but I knew them, and I'd pass the time of day with them. And also the people on reception and the general dog's bodies who no one's very bothered about. I always like to chat to them and get to know them, and but that was the job. And then I'd go to the studio. One of the designers would be working on a model. I'd get him, when he had it finished, I'd take away this precious little clay figure, take it away, get it cast up, go and see the tool designer, work with the tool designer on the layup of the tools, and then go to the tool maker with the drawings and say, can you knock this up? And come back with all the costumes and everything. Then when they'd made the tool, I'd go down and watch what had been tried out, any hiccups, help solve. Then when the tool was a runner, I'd take it back to Wiz Beach and it'd go into mass production.
Right.
And my job, I was flitting between my home, the moulding company at Wiz Beach, Nottingham, where head office was, and the tool makers, which were down in Essex and Kent. And I was doing 600 to 1,000 miles a week.
Wow.
If I was going to a tool maker for a tryout, I used to jump up out of bed at 5 o'clock in the morning, drive down, so I got through the Dartford Tunnel. They didn't have a bridge in them days. Get through the Dartford Tunnel by 7 o'clock, and I'd be at the tool makers 8 o'clock when they opened the door. I'd see the tools tried out, and then when it was right and we'd decided what was happening, if it was perfect, it was ready to run, I'd put it in the boot of my car. I used to always had an escort type car with a reinforced back, because you put a half-ton, quarter-ton mould in the back of it. Lift it in with a fork truck, and you have to get a fork truck to get it out the other end. And then I'd run it back up. One of the perks of the job used to be, as I'd started off so early in the day, I'd be coming back up the M11 early afternoon, lunchtime. I was able to pop into Duxford and froth over the airplanes. But no, it was
Amazing.
good. Then I'd take it in, take the tool into Whiz Beach, and we'd put it up and get it into production.
Right. Would this have been this is like the earlier sprues for things like this, like the skeletons and the Imperial
Yes.
Marines, the first Space Marines, and that sort of thing?
Yes.
I mean, what kind of limitations would you have had at that time in terms of materials, in terms of the size of tools and sprues? Was it quite restrictive?
No, I think finance was sometimes a restriction.
Right.
Size, I was geared by box sizes. When we first we were producing these little box sets. So you couldn't do too big a frame. So, but, I always used to say, bigger the frame, the more you're getting for the same machine time. Because it used to be about the average time to mold a frame, plastic frame, used to be 12 to 15 seconds. So if you imagine frame falling out for a minute, 240 an hour, and the factory used to run 24 hours a day, we could very soon generate quite a lot of figures. But if you made a two impression tool, you're even more.
Sure.
But if you're making a two impression tool, you might as well make a different one. Then you've got two different characters with the same. So yeah, on one of the early costings. You remember the Rhino?
Sure.
The Rhino, when we started the Space Marines, Brian had asked Bob and A. Smith, we need an APC for these Space Marines. And get with me, and the two of you sort it out and come up with the costings. And I said, is there any sort of budget? And he said, £6,000. So I thought, yeah, okay, let's see what we can do. I looked and I thought, it's going to be not quite the tool we thought. So I chatted to Bob, and we came up between us this concept, and Bob did the cardboard copy. But we thought, with that sort of money, I can build half a tool. So we designed the tool so that Bob done a cardboard mock-up of it. And you had inner track, outer track, bottom, couple of hatches, and one or two accessories, guns and things. But when you molded it, you only got half a tank. The second molding was exactly the same, but they fitted together. So you then had two tracks, a top, and the top and bottom were symmetric. So you glued them together, and if you study it, it's you had two hatches in the top and two in the bottom, but you put a good hatch on the bottom on one and a blanking plate on the other, and you ended up. So we were able to produce a tank, but it cost two moldings, and he got it for £6,000 tooling cost. Now, if you can imagine, we molded that, and I think it was costing something like about 15p for the plastic.
Right.
So for 30p, Brian got a Rhino. He made a box. He had to design a box, put a box and instructions. And then I think they sold for about 10.
Sure, but they were sold in like boxes of multiples, weren't there? There was two or three in a box as well initially.
And we start molding them, and I think the first production run was to match their packaging, and you're talking 10,000.
Right.
So,
wow,
he's got 6,000 tooling back.
Yeah.
after that, when we started on like the Land Raider and the Orc Battle Wagon,
Hmm.
Another aspect, when we made the Rhino tool, because we were limited on cost, I left a chunk of the tool blank. And when the Rhino was going well, it was suggested that we could do with a anti-tank version. We said, well, yes, we could sort that out. And we produced a Predator.
Hmm.
You know that it's like a turret of a JS3,
Right.
flying pan type thing,
Right.
stuck on top of a Rhino.
Yeah.
Well, I was able to cut one of them in the spare space I'd left on the Rhino tool. So we'd run it producing Rhinos, and then by turning 2 keys, we'd run it again and produce a Predator.
Yeah.
And then in the box, you'd put a Rhino frame and a Predator frame, and you'd build a Rhino with a turret on the top.
That's great.
It was, I really enjoyed the challenges I loved working with those designers.
Yeah.
They were fantastic guys, and go in there, and especially, I used to like Bob Naismith, especially. He was very down to it. One of the others we made, do you remember ever come across the Orc Battle Wagon?
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
I've got one of my actual frames here.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah. And a Rhino. And still got some. One of the things when I left, I should have done was take my records of all the tools I'd made, and that was all left together with tool drawings and everything else.
Hmm.
With the background I had, I could look at these drawings and know how they worked and what they're doing. When they were being made, I could know. So I could go into a tool room and walk around and see, yeah, that's up to date, that's working, and when they used to run them at Mortimer's, which was one of the tool makers, I could go in and see then that gate one's opening, that one's changing, that one's altering. Believe it or not, they sometimes use me for, can you sort this problem out for us? They're making another tool. And yeah, so yeah, if you try, yeah. I just, as it were, once with better expression, I knew my job.
Hmm.
But working with the designers, they were great. And the other thing was, I wasn't there 40 hours a week, 5 days a week. I'd walk in one day, see them, be there for 2 or 3 hours, and then vanish. And the next time they'd see me, be about a week later, I'd come in, and something had happened. I'd produced something, done something had turned up, and I used to make my trips so that I'd go to Chewton Street first, and I'd go in, and there was no designers or anything there, but just go in and just walk around the shop floor, chat to people, go in their stores and look at what the stock levels were. And, I'd look and I'd think, they were getting a bit low on 20 mil square, and there's none on order. So I'd go back to the Whiz Beach, get the tool running, and then a few days later, there would be this panic call. John, we're out of 20 mil slotter bases. Production will be stopping tomorrow. And I say, okay, yeah. Have you got any on order? No. Raise an order, and I'll bring some tomorrow. Next day, they'd order 10,000, and I'd take 10,000 out the boot of the car. So And after I'd been to Chewton Street, I'd make my way down to where High Pavement or the other one,
Is it
the other
low
one,
pavement or Enfield Chambers?
Enfield Chambers. Yeah, I'd go down there and I'd go in and chat to the guys. But the way I was working, I was not involved in office politics or, I was out of it. But I used to just come in, and during the whole time, Brian never once queried what I was doing. I think he had the common sense to say he's doing everything we want of him. Leave him to it, and just left to get on with it. I think he realised that I wouldn't, as it were, take advantage of the situation doing that. And okay, as games grew and we produced more and more stuff for them, Triple K, the moulding company I owned 20% of, was doing all the moulding. So I was making my money that way as well. So it was in my interest to ensure Games Workshop got top service. And when the buyers used to say, your plastic bases, can we get them cheaper anywhere else? Yeah, try some other moulders, and they get quoted, but they were always more expensive than Triple K. As I'd done the costing at Triple K, I always ensured that we were the cheapest and always got the best deal, because it was in both our interests. So yeah, it was a bit. We'd done all sorts of different things. Like ones I really liked was when we'd done the skeletons, first lot of skeletons, the little frame. I thought they were fantastic. You could build them in that many poses. You ever tried working out, how many different variations of skeleton you can build, but just by altering the arm, or even altering one arm. And they were great. We produced them. There was little bits of odd. The twins, I think, made them, and one of the figures, that's the original one. That guy they made specially so that he could sit on a horse. When we said that, there was this, not my idea, so it was cancelled.
Right.
And about a year later, due to demand, we produced skeleton horses.
Right. Okay. I mean, were there any mistakes or challenges or anything that did go wrong in terms of kits and frames that came out?
Not frames. If we went into molding a figure, it worked fine. Some of the ranges were not more successful than others. Like we done the epics, all the little tanks. They were. I remember that ruined my Christmas one year. We'd got the tool ready just for Christmas, just before Christmas, the end of December. And the orders came in, we need so many thousand shots. Got 5,000 boxes coming in. January the 1st, we want 5,000 sets of figures. So actually, John and I, between us, ran factory. Each of us would go in, switch on the machine, mold just them, pack them, ready to go. And he'd do a sort of 8-hour shift, and I'd come in and do an 8-hour shift. And then when they were all ready, 1st of January, they're all in my car, I delivered them. And the printer was a fortnight late.
Yikes.
I had Christmas Day at home. John had worked Christmas Day and Boxing Day and all the rest of the holiday. I'd worked. And to get this order out, and we didn't ask any of our people to do it because they were on holiday. But no, it's I thought one of the other things. One of the Trish, she made a dragon kit. Have you seen it?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. She done this beautiful dragon kit, and it was a beautiful body with all the bits built and the wings.
Right.
The wings were a separate tool to the body, and I made a suggestion that why don't we mold the wings in crystal material instead of the grey plastic? And to prove my point, I did mold some, a couple of dozen, and I actually built one and painted it up, and there he is.
Wow, yeah.
When I suggested that the studio, it was rejected, and I think it was another one of these. It's not my idea, so it can't be any good. So I've got a rather rare dragon here.
Amazing.
I gave some of the designers the wings, and how many of us still got them, I don't know. But, yeah. But it wouldn't have cost the company a penny more.
Right.
Because to mold them in crystal or mold them in grey plastic is the same.
Sure.
It was.
I suppose later on, actually, with like the Necrons, for instance, there would be the introduction of that kind of coloured plastic. So you'd get green plastic, like rods and things like that, to put into guns and things, wouldn't it?
Yeah. But no, the way things went, I really enjoyed it. We done the things like the tooling and everything for the Hero Quest when Milton Bradley came into us. But the designers worked on them, and I was coming in doing my bit, looking around, seeing, making sure they were all okay, and doing. I used to flit in and out like a bit of a go, flit in, flit out, and and didn't get on in anyone's feet, no problems. But I was always pleased and glad, and I had great respect for Bryan and his thinking. He knew what he was. He had the vision.
Yeah.
And all I was the tool that helped implement it. And I think it was good. And I attended his funeral, and I'd left in 1999, November 1999, and when I went to his funeral, bumped into all the designers I knew. It was like being, every one of them a new face. Yeah, great. Yeah, they were, and I got Rick Priestley's book, and him and John Stallard done this talking miniatures.
Oh, with Robin Hughes as well.
Yeah. Read it through, and as I read each sort of interview, I could just imagine the people and the voices, and yeah.
Such an incredible time in the company's history, though, isn't it? I mean, like you say, the vision that Bryan Ansell had and was pushing forward to say, right, let's take a look at plastics and let's see what we can do in that space, and can we push that technology forward? I mean, I'm curious actually, just about like at what point did Triple K become more integrated with Games Workshop? Was that still under your tenure as well?
Yes. We both companies ran parallel until 1998.
Right.
And then we'd always had this unofficial agreement, which Bryan and I had sort of come to when we first started, that if we were ever going to sell Triple K, Games Workshop would have first option. Then, at the period we were talking, 1998, John, my partner, had decided he'd had a few bad health spells, and he decided to retire. And we said to Games Workshop, John wants to retire. You want to buy us out? And June 1998, they bought us out.
Right.
And I was always been the managing director of Triple K. So I became the managing director of Triple K, but a subsidiary of Games Workshop.
Right.
Prior to that, it had always been, as it were, my own business.
Mm.
And that's, I think, at the point at which things changed. I went from being my own boss at Triple K to I had to report to a production director at head office. And they just brought in a new guy, and I reported to him, and sort of, he told me beforehand he'd worked at Dyson's, he was a whiz kid, was boom, 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 oh, great. And first time I met him, I thought to myself, not right. And he came over to the factory, started, oh, this has got to be done this way, that's got to be, that won't work. Do as you're told. I am the boss. And gradually I implemented things he was asking. And I think I was saying it won't work. That won't. We finally got to a meeting. He'd called a meeting, and I turned up as managing director of Triple K. John Pomfret was there. He'd stayed on as a consultant. We had Terry Ardino, the tooling manager, there. We had Ray Hills, who was the pattern maker and had been doing it for 40 years. Tom Clark, the tooling manager from Mortimer's, he'd been doing it for 40 years. These people had been in the business for years. And we were sitting around the table, and this guy comes in with a plastic cup, tips it on the floor, on the table, and there's a frame with great chunks of plastic cut out of it. And we all look at it, and he says, if you block off these channels in the tool, we can save all this plastic. Well, they all looked at each other. Didn't he, you know? And he says, how would you do it? And, you know, it's silly. And he did start to try and, well, we could, you'd have difficulty getting the material to flow around the tool with all these blockages. And some of them you wouldn't even get, you'd have to start putting hot tips in. Well, could you do that? Oh, yeah. But it means to say each hot tip's going to cost you about £1,000. And you'd have to make the tool bigger to accommodate all this technical gear. Oh, right. Well, I like it. And at this point, I'm afraid I'd lost my rag. And I turned around and I said, don't put that. You've got all this expertise here, and they're telling you it can't be done, or it's totally impractical, and you're not listening. So he went off and reported me to Chris Barker, and I got told. But he was on a 6-month trial period, I think. At the end of the 6 months, he sacked him. And then I went, put everything back in place that he'd changed and altered. Then he brought another one in, but he wasn't too bad. He came in and came over to his beach, looked at the operation, went away and left us in peace and tried. He'd been appointed, I think, by the banks to look at our financial situation. And he was quite happy with his beach, so he backed off. Then they brought in another one named Neil. And I'm having to report to these guys. They're coming in, Games Workshop, are taking on these experts, whiz kids, and I'm reporting to them. And this guy, he was a bit knowledgeable, but one of the things that happened was I was told not to bring John on site as a consultant. John, the moulding shop and this company had been his life. And he'd come in, he'd come over, he had nothing to do, he'd come over, he'd come on site, and he'd play in the machines. And if we had any problems, he'd look. And, I had chats and we've been friends for 25 years or something. But it got back to head office, and then one day I was called in and told, don't allow him on site anymore. I said, well, you employ him as a consultant. Don't consult him. I said, what about his check? Oh, we're quite happy to keep paying, but we don't want him on site.
Right.
Yeah, bit naughty. And I sort of said, who's going to tell him? I'm not. And he says, we'll sort of tell him, but apparently word had been getting back every time he visited. And I wasn't there to do it. At that time, I'd also been having some health problems. After all the years, I suddenly had trouble with the stomach, and I thought it was possibly cancer. It was sudden, all the symptoms. So I went off, went through all the medical checks and everything. They done a couple of bits and pieces, check probes and things, and they removed some bits and pieces. But in the end, he says, "You're all right." He says, "But what you have got is an ulcer. You want to change your lifestyle." I says, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you're getting a bit stressed, changing." So I went home, had a word with the wife. Says, "Look, doctor recommends I change my lifestyle, give up work." So I went in and gave me notice in.
Right. Just like that.
Gave me notice in on the 1st of November. And rather surprisingly, normally, if someone gives their notice in a company like that, especially someone in a senior position, they pack everything in a cardboard box and escort it off the premises. I was told to dig out all my plans I had for the factory. I'd put modifications, changes to the factory, budgets and everything. I was asked to bring them all up to date, check all the current prices and everything, and which I did. And then when that was all done, I left on the 12th of November.
Right.
So they left me there for 12 days, but I carried on. One of the other things that when it became Games Workshop, while it was Triple K, owned by me and John, I used to use the tool room to make JB models.
Right.
Triple K used to run them. Now, there was no, want of a better expression, favoritism. I paid the going price for the mouldings, and I paid for the tooling. So, it was, and the tooling was financed out the sales. And eventually JB got up to 12 models in the range. And I was told I couldn't run them on the site. So I had to move my own molds off the site and find other molders. And all the other companies, Games Workshop, Triple K used to mold for, Perkins Engines, Massey Ferguson, Interflora. We had to give these people their tools and say, you have to find someone else. We did help them find other people and work with other people. But we became solely molding Games Workshop. Because Games Workshop actually represented about 60 to 70% Triple K's moldings. We had all these other companies we used to supply as well. So we weren't entirely dependent on Games Workshop.
Right.
When we were brought out, we then became totally Games Workshop, and all these other people had to go elsewhere.
Sure.
We always had income coming from other sources. And I say, one of the other things was Bob Naismith, the designer. I used to love working with Bobby. Lovely. Get to know me better. He had a lovely Scottish accent. Whenever I watch Christmas Carol and I see the ghost of their Christmas present, and he says, "You know me better, man." Bob used to always use that sort of thing. He was great. I love it. Bob used to paint the artwork for my JB models.
Right.
So I've actually got, and in the garage at the moment in the box, 12 framed paintings, the artwork and the JB models, painted by Bob. Never got him to sign them. I should have done. It'd have been weird. So, and one or two of the other people in the studio done things for me. As the range grew, I used to do all the work myself, design the instruction sheets and draw them up and everything. I was able to get people to do them in Games Workshop who had them sort of talents, and I'd pay them. But they'd draw me up, do me instructions for me, and I'd pay them. But yeah, that was something else that when games, it was those last few months were the last 18 months. Games Workshop, it was changing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the change to the entire corporation, right? The culture of the company has become more professional and more sort of corporate, I suppose.
Corporate, yes. I don't know about professional.
Okay.
Because people skills seem to be lacking.
Right.
Let's say the guy I was dealing with, Neil, he was supposed to be running production. I think he'd been briefed as to he must make the metal side of it more profitable. And he instructed me to cut the price of all the plastic bases so that when they made a finished plastic, a metal product, it looked cheaper because plastic was cheap.
Right.
And I said, that's not ethical, that's immoral, I says, and I refused. And I think I was pushing up against it. And I got to know when the day he suggested that to me, I got annoyed. And people could see I was annoyed. And you shouldn't get annoyed, I think. The guys. Yeah. Mind you, I had the satisfaction of learning that I left in the November and they sacked him in the January. So from them taking over Games Triple K, I had 3 production directors above me, and all of them got sacked after 6 months.
Right.
But,
no one could do it as well as you, John. It sounds like.
well, I'd got myself out. I was my health, family,
Yeah.
and that more of a concern. And then 2000, I was unemployed. I did think of going back into industry. My wife said to me, because I did look round. I was approached by a couple of headhunters, including one working for Games Workshop. We've looked at your brief. You sound just the perfect guy for what they're looking for. I thought, oh, yeah. But yeah, no,
John, I mean, it's been fantastic chatting to you. I can't let you go, actually, just without asking a quick question about something you mentioned earlier, because there's a persistent rumor about the Land Raider kit, that original Land Raider kit, that it was only in production for a brief amount of time because something happened to the mold or the tool, and it was damaged in some way. Do you remember that at all, or is that just one of these rumors out there?
No. One of the things about the tools I made, or made while in my period, they, I would say, are guaranteed for at least 1 million runs.
Wow.
You'd have to do some real damage. If you just ran it normally, you'd have no problems.
Right.
You only have to look at some of the Airfix kits now. This is something about games I can't understand. Airfix always used to run a kit, put it away, put the molds away, and the molds exist. But they never run them again. They always created a demand. And now they've come up with this classics series, and all the old kits are coming back. And you look at them, you've got kits that were run in 1960, 70, coming out, and they are as good as new. If you look after these tools and they're made properly, they'll last. Really. Slotta bases, they were running for decades. We just kept making them. I think at one point someone said that if we took all the 20 mil square slotta bases we'd made, glued them all together, we'd reach the moon. It was a ridiculous amount of them we'd made. But yeah. No, I enjoyed my whole time at Games Workshop. Only the last change at the end, when attitudes towards people and that. When I was leaving, I didn't even have a sort of formal, why are you leaving? The comment was, oh, you've decided to go.
Right.
Now, yeah, I thought, that's rather, not where I was going, because I'm dealing with these idiots and these people, and they don't know their jobs, and I'm being asked to do things which I don't consider ethical, and no, you've decided to leave. But no regrets, because when I left, I found myself twiddling my thumbs, and I thought, what shall I do? And I got involved with local community, healthy walking, U3A, Probus, you name it. I got involved in it, running the local community centre. And I ended up, as it were, working 5 days a week on community activities. And I'm still great satisfaction, and I enjoy it. I enjoy Games Workshop as well, and the people. Every one of those designers, thought they were great.
Well, John, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for coming to chat and to share some of those stories. It's been great.
Thanks, Jordan. Nice to chat to you. I look forward to seeing it.
Massive thank you to John for taking the time to talk to me about his experience running the plastics for Games Workshop. It is a hugely vital part of Games Workshop's history, so I'm so glad that we got the chance to talk about it. It was a really great conversation. If you would like to support the work that I do, documenting the history of Games Workshop and tabletop games, and interviewing the people who made all of that possible, you can do so by checking out my Patreon via the link in the description below. Any support you can offer is very greatly received. And you can also listen to my interviews as a podcast. Just search for In Conversation with Jordan Sorcery wherever you get your pods, and you should find it. Thank you once again to John. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.